In this unit, I've been trying to provide you with a few different perspectives on how you should live, what you should value, what your life should revolve around. In the piece that we read by Helen Keller, she tried to make a case that it's important to be optimistic, that it's important to have some kind of faith and trust in the nature of being, in the future of humanity, that these are preconditions for success, happiness, and fulfillment. And then what we saw last time was a strong case against the saturation and use of technology in our lives. More specifically, modern technologies, right? We talked about social media, chemical technologies, genetic technologies, television, computer, so on and so forth. Glendinning tried to argue that our society is deeply informed by these different techniques, institutions, gadgets, machines, and that it's actually really detracting from life. That it's causing all of these problems that we have to deal with, that we're wrestling with now. And so she encourages a more primitive lifestyle, a return to a way of being that is more in touch with nature. Well, today we're going to look at another philosophy of life, although this one has a more ambiguous attitude towards technology. It is rather straightforward. It's one that you've probably heard of before. Heck, it may be one that you're living right now, even though you may not realize it. Today we're looking at hedonism and Epicureanism, which are similar but distinct philosophies of life. That is, we're investigating the philosophy of Epicurus today and his followers. Epicurus was an ancient Greek philosopher. He founded the school that we're looking at today. And he may be one of the OG hippies, if we can call him that. Think about how a hippie speaks nowadays or what they want. I want to move out and live in the forest with my friends, man, right? I want to hang out. I want to get away from all this stuff. Get back to my roots, what really matters. Epicurus was basically about something similar, as we'll see. He actually ended up founding a commune back during his day in which he and his friends and followers lived and ate and spent time together. This was known as the Garden. And it is a wish or an aim that a lot of people have today as well. As, if Glendinning is correct, we are living into these very technological lives that are harming us in various ways. So the philosophy of life that we're going to be looking at today is one that is shared by a lot of different people. But I hope to make it a little bit more explicit and transparent to you. One way of looking at these different ways of living is that they all have kind of a different guiding star. Or they encourage a life to revolve around something in particular, a certain value, a certain project, a certain aim. In this way, we might say that no matter how you live or how you're thinking about living, your life will revolve around something. You will serve something at the end of the day, whether you realize it or not. Now, it might differ from person to person, right? Maybe the thing that you serve ultimately at the end of the day is God. Maybe God is your guiding star, your guiding light. Or maybe the thing that you serve at the end of the day is yourself. Or maybe the value that you are aimed at or what your life revolves around is the cultivation of pleasure. or making a difference. So I would encourage you to look at the philosophies in this unit as providing different guiding stars to you. I think we might be able to say rather reasonably that in life, you may not get to choose that you serve, but you do get to choose what you serve. And so that should be what you're trying to work out in these last few weeks. What is it that you should be aimed at? What is it that you should serve? Well, Epicurus is going to provide us with one answer to that question today. Now, to understand a little bit more about this philosophy, it might be helpful to have some historical context. In Western society, we trace the roots of philosophy and a lot of our political views back to the ancient Greeks and Romans. It was Alfred North Whitehead who said once, I believe, that all Western philosophy is just footnotes to Plato. So the characters of Plato, his mentor Socrates, his student Aristotle, they have all been incredibly important in the emergence of philosophy in the West and its development over the last few thousand years. The philosophy that Plato developed ended up becoming pretty popular. And it ended up surviving into the Middle Ages and influencing medieval philosophy as well. But obviously things don't stay static, right? Ideas change, ideas develop, societies change. Not everybody was on board with the kind of philosophy that Plato offered and that he argued for. We might say that as Greek and Roman thought evolved, philosophy split into a few different schools after the Greeks were conquered by the Romans. One of those schools was known as skepticism. The skeptics were interested in, well, not just taking what the philosophers and the other authorities were saying at face value, but actually questioning the nature of reality, the doxa, the dogmas, looking into the questions themselves. So that was one branch. We have the skeptics. Another branch that came off was the Stoics. Stoicism became a philosophy of life that was particularly popular among ancient Romans, especially ancient Roman aristocrats and intellectuals. The Stoics basically thought that we should be trying to make ourselves happy. That is what our ultimate value is. That's what we should be pursuing. But what that looks like is a little bit different compared to some other philosophies. The Stoics thought that in order to attain a fulfilling, happy life, you have to cultivate self-control. You have to cultivate control over your emotions. You have to think and develop such a character such that you're able to approach situations level-headedly. You're not swept up by your emotions or what's going on in your body, your instincts, your impulses or desires. But you approach things rationally. You approach things calmly. And you try to fulfill your duty as a human being, looking out not only for your good, but also for the good of other people, generally speaking. Similarly to Stoicism in this regard, the philosophy that we're looking at today thinks that happiness is what we should be aiming for. Epicureanism is going to say that the way that we should be living our lives is one that generally seeks to satisfy our desires, but one that does so moderately. In fact, as we'll see, Epicurus is going to encourage us not to seek positive pleasure in all things, but rather to seek something a little bit different. What he's going to call ataraxia, or untroubledness. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, so we're going to speak on this last school, or this last thread today that I just mentioned in this slide. Now, there are a bunch of things that kind of separates Epicurus from the other philosophies of his day, especially Platonism, and philosophies that came after him, like Christianity, like existentialism, like transhumanism, etc. Epicurus's view of what it is that we should be pursuing is based on a particular metaphysics. Formulated, I think, first, or at least popularized by the ancient Greek philosopher Democritus, Epicurus was what we would call an atomist. He thought that basically the universe was made up of these atoms, or uncuttable, indivisible units, moving in various ways. So he had what we might call, if we can hearken back to Unit 1, a materialist metaphysics. He thought that we exist in this universe in which stuff is physical, and there's this natural stuff, and it operates according to, certain principles. This is not the same kind of metaphysics that Plato had, for example, or that Christianity espouses. If you believe that one underlying substance makes up everything in the universe, if you're a monist, and if you are further a materialist and you think that substance is physical in nature, that is obviously a very different view than the idea that the mind and the body are distinct and made up of different things. Right? This would have been the dualism that we looked at, put forth by Descartes and Locke. And it was also very different from the Platonic view that there is the material realm, and then there is a transcendent realm or dimension of the forms, in which these eternal universals, which are perfect, reside, from which the material things of reality come and are just imperfect reflections. Very different view. Very different view from Christianity as well, which is going to posit not only the existence of physical things and natural things, right, but immaterial things, spiritual beings, a heaven and a hell perhaps, a God, what we might call supernaturalism. So we could say that Epicurus is going to be offering us a philosophy that is materialistic in the metaphysical sense of the word. He doesn't care about iPhones and computers, okay, but materialistic in the metaphysical sense of the word. One that prioritizes the here and now. What's going on earth? What's happening? The struggles and affairs of daily life. In contrast to the Platonists or the Christians who would say, well, what matters here doesn't matter so much as what happens there, right? Or what is spiritual. That is what is meaningful. So we see this in Christianity, for example, and in how Christians live their lives, a lot of them. They might think that the things on earth are important, right? That things are unfair, perhaps, and need to be fixed. But the stuff of this world is not the priority, right? The priority is the health of the soul, or the fate of the soul. Not only one's own soul, but others. The will of God. So you could say that the philosophy of life that he's offering for us today is rather grounded. It's grounded here on earth. It cares about earthly stuff. Generally, it's going to turn a blind eye to these matters of whether God exists, whether there's a heaven or hell, whether there's an afterlife. It's going to say we can't know about any of that. Okay, so why are we thinking about it? Why are we so worried about it? We should be focused on what's happening right here, trying to make this good, thinking about this. In this way, it lines up with the epistemology of empiricism. Platonism was very rationalistic in its thought. If you can remember what we investigated in Unit 1, rationalism was the view that we obtain knowledge primarily of the universe around us through our reasoning capacities, through thinking, reflection, deduction. Empiricism was, more bodily, right? It said, actually, the way that we obtain knowledge of most of this stuff is through our senses, through what we feel, taste, smell, hear, and so on. Epicurus is basically going to be on that side. He thinks that reason can add a lot to human life. There are some amazing things that we can do with reason, but we shouldn't get lost in these logical puzzles and philosophical problems. We should, be doing stuff in the world, learning from what our senses have to tell us, because that is what ultimately is cluing us into what's going on in the here and now. Finally, then, what Epicurus is going to hold up as the highest good is pleasure. Ultimately, pleasure and happiness, that is what matters. That is what we should be pursuing. Not necessarily moral righteousness. That's a different thing, right? Not necessarily being the most rational. That's a different thing. Maybe sometimes you'd be happier if you weren't overthinking about things, right? And being super hyper-rational. So, for Epicurus, what we should be pursuing, our ultimate value, or our guiding star, our North Star, is going to be pleasure and happiness. That is it. That is what our lives should revolve around. In contrast to Christianity, you might say, which says, spiritual health perhaps is what matters most. In contrast to Platonism, which might say, knowledge is what we should be oriented at. We should be pursuing knowledge above all else. Now, the way that I've presented it so far, as pleasure or happiness being our highest good, there are at least two different philosophies of life that hold that view, although they come at things a little bit differently. One of them is the Epicureanism that we're going to be looking at today. But another one that I feel that I should mention, which is closely related to it, is known as hedonism. Is this a word that you've heard before? Oh, that person's hedonistic. They live a hedonistic lifestyle. Yeah? What do we mean when we say that? Someone is hedonistic.
Pretty sure it means like overindulgent in many things, sort of gives into a lot of like the 7 deadly sins kind of thing.
Yeah. In our day and age, it's come to have this connotation of overindulgence, maybe decadence, right? If someone's living a hedonistic lifestyle, the kind of archetype that I think of is like the celebrity, or the famous director, or the famous artist. And what kinds of lives do some of these people lead? They're into drugs, they're into alcohol, rock and roll, and sex, and all the nice things in life, right? Good food and good drink. That is one way that you might live. Now, you might not specifically pursue drugs and sex and rock and roll, but to live a hedonistic lifestyle is to pursue pleasure. That is what you are doing if you're living a hedonistic lifestyle. Now, because our culture and our society is so saturated with Christianity, this word hedonism kind of has a negative connotation, right? For many years, the people of our society have believed and have been educated into thinking that the pursuit of bodily interests in the things of the body is not as important as the pursuing the stuff of the soul or the stuff of the mind, right? Virtue, knowledge, reason. I'm not telling you what stance you should take on that. I'm just saying, generally, if you were to hear this word nowadays, people might attach a negative connotation to it. But this is a possible philosophy of life that you could pursue, right? And perhaps if you were honest with yourself, you might open up and say, yeah, this is actually kind of what I'm doing. If you're a Christian and instead of going to church on Sunday, you decide to sleep in because you're just very tired, do you really serve God above all else? Not in that moment, right? And you're like, I want to lay in bed because that's comfortable and it's warm and it's nice. That's pleasure, right? If you are somebody who's, all about knowledge and you're like, I pursue knowledge, that is my end in life, and, instead of actually reading, you're doing lines in the bathroom with your buddies, are you really all about knowledge? Well, it's a question worth asking, right? When hard situations come at you, or difficult decisions, it will be revealed to you what it is that you are pursuing or living your life by. I don't think it's a stretch to say a lot of people are hedonistic in our day and age. Because we all spend so much time, pursuing things that are comfortable and that are pleasurable to us, right? Whether that is drugs or alcohol or rotting in our beds, whatever it is. So this is one philosophy of life that you could live by. You could pursue pleasure. You could pursue the satisfaction of your own desire. And this is a way that a lot of people live. And a lot of people think this life is fun, right? You can do a lot of stuff. You can have a good time. Of course, people in following many philosophies of life go overboard, right? Let's imagine you really love Captain Morgan, okay? 100 proof Captain is your favorite. You get a handle every Friday. If you were to drink that every day, how would you feel in the morning? Every morning. Perhaps not as bad as I would feel, because y'all are fairly young and your bodies can bounce back. But let me tell you, when you get older, you will not be able to handle it as well. You're not going to feel good, okay? So, in a weird paradoxical way, you can lean too far into the pursuit of pleasure, right? If you lean too far into it, it might come back to bite you in the butt. You drink too much, you're going to have a hangover. You do too many drugs, that's going to maybe leave you feeling anxious and upset the next day. You pursue too much sex, if it's unprotected, you might get some stuff that you don't want, right? And this is actually one of the reasons why Epicurus is going to say, pursuing positive pleasure shouldn't be your ultimate goal. You shouldn't be just running around trying to have sex with everything and drinking all the wine and doing all the drugs. Because unfettered pursuit of pleasure is not going to actually be a very pleasurable life. It's actually going to harm you, and it's going to bring you pain and suffering if you're not careful. So Epicurus says pursuing pleasure is good, pursuing pleasure is fun, and it feels nice. But he says, let me just shift your orientation a little bit. Instead of pursuing just positive pleasure, try this instead. Pursue untroubledness. Or pursue contentment. That is the kind of philosophy of life that he's going to be offering us. The word for this is ataraxia. He says living a pleasurable life is good. We should want that. We should pursue that. But not a pleasurable life that goes overboard. And a pleasurable life which is just aiming at something a little bit different. We should aim to be untroubled. We should aim to be not uncomfortable. We should aim to be content. Which is a different thing, right, than I want to flood my brain with dopamine. It's a different thing. And so, as we go through some of his principal doctrines today, what we'll see is he encourages kind of a very commonsensical philosophy. He says, pursue contentment. And how do you do that? Well, live your life in moderation, make friends, live with your friends, and be nice. That's basically what he's going to say. Why? Well, because all of this stuff is going to allow you to have a fulfilling, pleasurable life. Make sense? Not too hard, right? Not too complicated. So his philosophy, generally speaking, is going to be one that is concerned with the here and now. He might encourage you to put those anxieties and worries about God, heaven and hell, your death, the afterlife out of your mind. Because you can't know anything about that. Or if you can, you don't know anything about it now, so what's the point in worrying? Like Rousseau, we might say, Epicurus provides us with a distinction between what our natural desires are and the kinds of artificial desires that are conditioned into us through our education, through parenting, through how we are born and raised in society. What was one of Rousseau's biggest criticisms about our society? Well, it was this. We've set up a system that makes us want and need things that we don't actually want and need. Can you go an hour without looking at your phone? Can you go a day without checking your Instagram or your TikTok? Can you go a weekend without drinking? Can you go an hour without hitting your vape? These are things that Rousseau would point to and say, you have all these artificial needs and desires for things that you don't really need. That's bad. Why? Because you become a slave to your desires in this way. Right? You're not as free and strong as independent as you could be. You're dependent on all these things for security or happiness. And that's bad. Epicurus says something similar. He's going to say, as you grow and are raised in the society that you live in, you're taught to want certain things. You're taught that certain things are going to make you happy. For example, power. Power will make you happy. Money will make you happy. Just make a lot of money. Or you want to be happy? You got to go out and buy that new gadget. That's going to make you happy. These are the messages that we receive, right? From companies and corporations, advertising. But Epicurus is going to say, forget about that stuff. Okay? Don't try to fulfill those empty desires, those artificial desires. Doing so isn't actually going to fulfill you as a human being. I give you all the money in the world. Are you going to be happy? If you're not already like a healthy, secure, self-loving person, probably not. Right? I mean, look at the people who win the Powerball. Their lives end up being shit the majority of the time. Or if I gave you all the power in the world, would you be happy? Or all the fame, all the notoriety? Epicurus would probably say, probably not. You're probably not going to be happy. So stop thinking about that stuff. Don't pursue those things endlessly because they're not going to fill you up. Instead, just worry about fulfilling your natural desires. Your desire for community or as a social being. Your desire for food, your desire for water, your minimal desire for comfort. Meet those. Learn to be content with that stuff. And you'll be able to live a fulfilling life. In this way, he's kind of encouraging us to recalibrate our expectations. To cultivate some gratitude for what we have and to learn to be content with the little things in life. This is why he kind of encourages a more ascetic philosophy of life than a lot of us are living right now. Think of all the things that you have. You have all these clothes and jewelry and gadgets. You get your Starbucks every week. Maybe you buy the new Stanley mug every month. I don't know. My partner just bought a Stanley mug and she's super happy about it. Epicurus is going to say, though, you don't need all that stuff to be happy. You don't need to pursue that stuff. You shouldn't even worry about that stuff. You shouldn't base your happiness on those things. Instead, if you could learn to be content and have gratitude for, well, the fact that you have a roof over your head, that you can go into the woods and see beautiful, amazing creatures whenever you want, that, oh my goodness, the sky is beautiful today, that you have friends and that you can talk to them and have funny conversations and crack jokes. If you could learn to be happy with that, man, you would be soaring. You'd realize that you got it made. So find pleasure in the little things. Find happiness in, well, resting easy in the fact that things could be a lot worse, and you actually have a lot in your life right now. The kind of rat race, perhaps, that our society encourages is not something that Epicurus would agree with. The focus on materiality and consumption is one that he would say, nah, probably not. That's probably not the way to go. Make sense? In this way, it's kind of very commonsensical, rather straightforward. And so what I would like to do is just go over some of the passages in the reading that I asked you to do for today. Epicurus' principal doctrines. Because I think if we read through a few of them and talk about them, we'll start to understand better what he's trying to give us, the kind of perspective that he's encouraging. So let's start with the second passage. He says, "Death is nothing to us, for the body, when it has been resolved into its elements, has no feeling. And that which has no feeling is nothing to us." So what is he saying there? What kind of attitude should we take towards our inevitable deaths? What do you think?
I think he's saying we really shouldn't care about it much because it ultimately isn't affecting our state, I guess.
Yeah. In very few words, he actually gives us an argument. You might not be so comfortable or familiar with arguments being presented like this. But he's trying to give us a certain point of view on how we should feel about death and why we shouldn't really worry about it at all. We're all going to die, right? Unless one of us happens to be the lucky few that gets taken up to paradise, like Enoch or Elijah. We're all probably going to die, right? And we probably have a lot of anxieties and worries and fears about that. Does anybody worry about that? Maybe you thinking about it just freaks you out a little bit. Yeah? Well, Epicurus says you should think about it like this. Death is not something that you need to or should fear at all. Let's think about why you worry about and fear things. What do you fear in life? Somebody shout something out. What do you fear? I fear getting stabbed in the heart. Okay, what do you all fear? Being broke. What else? You fear getting shot in the head? Yeah, I think that's a reasonable thing to fear. Okay, what else do you fear? What are you worried about? Death, yeah. Why? Why this stuff? Being broke, being stabbed, being shot. Why do people worry about that stuff? Yeah.
All because of how I was accustomed to death and fear and being broke. If you're broke, then you're on the streets, and then
Yeah.
then you're in trouble. And then when you die, you go to heaven or hell, and you don't know if it's where you go, and it's the fear of not knowing.
So it's like, you mentioned being on the streets, right? If you're broke. Would it be comfortable living on the streets? Would it bring you pleasure to be stabbed in the heart? No, we fear things that make us feel bad, right? That bring us pain, that bring us suffering. That is why we fear things. Now, the funny thing about death, Epicurus is going to say, is that's not something we're ever going to feel. So why would we fear it? If death is the cessation of experience, if death is the moment your lights go out, you're not going to experience it. One moment you'll be here, the next moment you're gone. So why would you be worried or fear about that? You're not going to feel it. You're not going to experience your death at all. You might experience dying if you're unlucky, But you're not going to experience death. So he says, quit worrying about it. What's all the hubbub? Yeah.
I think maybe, at least for people who believe that that's like that, like less of the fear of death and more so the fear of missing out on what life has, because there's
Okay.
the idea that I guess we call it the fear of missing out, that if there's nothing, like if life is experiencing things and death is the absence of experiencing things, then the fear would be that you just don't get to experience anymore.
Yeah.
Missing out on possibly literally anything.
Okay, so maybe that's one reason that people fear death. Maybe they fear death because they're like, golly gee, I'm upset I'm not going to be able to see lightsabers. Those are definitely coming down the pipe in the next 40 years, and I'm not going to see them. I'm not going to see awesome, cool spaceships. I don't get to see hoverboards. I don't want to die. Okay, maybe that's one reason why people fear it. Do you think that fear of missing out, though, is rational?
Sort of, but not really, because when you die, you can still see what your loved ones are doing and be with your loved ones. You have a spirit, obviously, and you can contact with your family.
Yeah, maybe something Epicurus would say would be something like this. You're upset about not being around for a lot of stuff. You're not upset about how many years you weren't existing. What's with that asymmetry? Does anybody here lament the fact they weren't born earlier? Right? So why are you worried about dying at a certain time? Right? Now, this might still not be convincing to you. Why? Why else might somebody fear death? Not fear of missing out, but
the unknown.
The unknown.
How people, some people are religious and stuff like that. If it's really true or not.
So when you say it's really true or not, what do you mean?
If you die, it just goes black, and then that's kind of it. Or if you get reincarnated.
Yeah.
Or you go up to heaven. It all depends on what you believe in.
The concept that he's using of death here is the end. You're done, you're gone. Does everybody believe that's what's going to happen to us when our physical body dies? No, right? A lot of people fear death because they're like, fuck, I don't know where I'm going to end up, and that terrifies me, right? So maybe if you're more religiously or spiritually inclined, you still might be really worried about dying. Because you're like, I might go to the bad place. Or maybe I'll be reincarnated as a slug. Right? And that would suck. Yeah. So I guess it depends on what your views are of the afterlife. Yeah? But then again, Epicurus would say, probably in response to that, so you were taught that the afterlife exists. Have you ever seen it? Do you know that it exists? So you're just afraid that something might be real. Okay, well, why don't you just chill out, bro? I don't know if that's comforting to you, but maybe. In any case, he thinks that if we can reel in our fears and anxieties surrounding death, we'd all be a lot more happy and content. One of the doctrines. How about another one? He says, the magnitude of pleasure reaches its limit in the removal of all pain. When pleasure is present, so long as it is uninterrupted, there is no pain either of body or of mind or of both together. Continuous pain does not last long in the body. On the contrary, pain, if extreme, is present a short time. And even that degree of pain, which barely outweighs pleasure in the body, does not last for many days together. Illnesses of long duration even permit of an excess of pleasure over pain in the body. It is impossible to live a pleasant life without living wisely and well and justly. And it is impossible to live wisely and well and justly without living pleasantly. Whenever any one of these is lacking, when, for instance, the person is not able to live wisely, though he lives well and justly, it is impossible for him to live a pleasant life. Okay, so he's saying a lot of things there, but what's one thing that he's saying? What do y'all think? He's offering us a few different claims here. I know it's Thursday and in the morning, but find that energy, chug your coffee.
I feel like the sentence says continuous pain does not last long in the body. I feel like
Yeah.
physical pain, yes, but emotional pain it can last forever. So how can that affect death on emotional pain?
Yeah, that's a good question. What you hone in on is one of the things that he's going to argue for here, which is if you take stock of your life and if you're honest about it, Epicurus is going to say, there's more pleasure in your life than there is pain. And he's going to say, when you find yourself in a painful situation or a situation in which you're suffering, although it's human nature to focus on that and be negative and to think everything sucks, he's really kind of saying here, it's usually not as bad as you think it is. It usually doesn't last that long. You can endure it. Your life is probably better than you realize. And one of the reasons why he's going to say this is because, like Buddhism, which we're going to explore in this class, I think Epicurus believes that so much of how we experience life comes down to our mental state, our perspective, what we pay attention to, what our mind is like. So it may be that you have experienced physical pain in your life and emotional pain. Maybe you're suffering from depression right now or anxiety. But Epicurus might say it's not as if you're destined to feel that way forever. And it's not as if things can't change. I think in his own mind, Epicurus thinks we over-exaggerate the pain and suffering that we experience. The way that he's understanding pleasure is that when you are simply resting, when you are comfortable in your seat, when you aren't experiencing pain or distress, that is itself pleasurable. So if you're just chilling there right now and you're doing fine and nothing hurts, Epicurus would say you're experiencing pleasure right now. Although you probably just don't see it that way. This is why he says the removal of all pain constitutes pleasure. What do y'all think about this? Do you think he's right that we over-exaggerate our pain and suffering? Do you think he's right that we experience more pleasure than pain? Yay, yes or no? Yay or nay? Obviously, this is going to differ from person to person, right? But generally speaking, let's say you don't have MS and you're not dying. Okay? You personally, individually. Yeah?
I would say so, yes.
You're doing okay? Would you say you have more pleasure than pain in your life? Anybody disagree? Now you're like thinking back on all the things that you've experienced in your childhood memories, and you're like, I don't know. Maybe? Yeah.
I think you can kind of convince yourself either way, and it's kind of your perspective on it.
Ah, okay, so a lot of it has to do with how you're looking at your life, you're saying. You could convince yourself either way. Do you know people who have done that to themselves? Which side have they come down on? Both sides?
Yeah.
So you know somebody who thinks that their life is shit and it's all pain and suffering. And you know somebody who thinks that their life is great. What does it look like from the outside when you look at their two lives?
I mean, they live like relatively similar lives, and it's just like one has a super positive outlook on things and kind of gets more done. The other one's really negative and thinks that the world's against them.
Yeah, so maybe there is something to be said about the attitude that we bring towards how we interpret what's going on and what's happening to us. Maybe Epicurus is more like the positive person that you spoke of, right? He's like looking at things and he's like, look, I got my friends, I got my commune, oh, look at that bird, oh, things are great, you know? Now, not everybody has that disposition or that personality trait. But that kind of gratitude and that kind of optimism is something that you could cultivate, right? If you worked at it. Yeah. Well, what's going to be part of that kind of life? Our power is limited, right? We don't have control over everything. There are things that we could do to make our own experience of life more enjoyable, more pleasurable. Besides just trying to remove discomfort from our lives, Epicurus is also going to encourage us to treat others well, to be just people. Because he has this commonsensical view that when you do good things for people, you're going to feel good. And when you do good things, that's going to make the environment better that you're living in. And maybe that'll cause other people to do good things for you and to you, and that's good. So, he would also encourage us to cultivate wisdom, try to cultivate an understanding of how all this works so that we can respond appropriately to the situations of life, but also to, spread some love where we can and to be kind and patient with people. Without this kind of wisdom and this kind of justice, he doesn't think that we'll be able to live the most pleasurable life that we are capable of. What do y'all think about that? You agree? You think the pleasurable life requires you to be kind of a good person? Yeah.
No, because if you take like serial killers for example, like they like killing people and
Yeah.
theoretically they're bad people, but they're still having like a pleasurable life in their eyes.
Ah. Let me play devil's advocate, because I think you actually have a good point there. Would you say that the serial killer who enjoys raping and killing is truly happy?
I think you have to classify what's like truly happy, because you could like play like the mental illness card also. So like I think a majority of them are truly happy in their own eyes, but like from a societal perspective, we wouldn't see them as happy.
but I think they are actually happy.
Okay.
Because why would they be killing people if they didn't get something out of it?
Yeah, well, I mean, we do a lot of pleasurable things that hurt us, right? We buy jewels, and we drink too much on Friday nights, and we get super high so we can fall asleep. You know, in the moment, you might say these things are pleasurable, right? But looked at from a broader perspective, are they making you happy? Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. You're going to have to decide that, right? What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, like, I don't know if I can say they're truly happy, just because for the fact that they're constantly seeking like their pleasure and stuff like that. I feel like if you're truly happy, like you seek your pleasure, but you also find pleasure without it. If that makes sense. Like
so you're kind of sympathetic to this view that like you don't need to be doing all this crap and getting all this stuff in order to be truly happy. Like in some sense, it comes from you.
Because I have a couple friends that just like they live like the normal lives, like barely use social media and stuff like that, and like they're really content with their lives. And, like they don't seek like any existential or like materialistic things for like, pleasure. So I feel like if you're truly happy, you really don't need all the pleasures.
Yeah, I think Epicurus would agree with you. I think you would say, if you're oriented towards life properly, you'll find that happiness actually isn't super hard to obtain. Like, happiness is to be found in the contentment and the gratitude with the things that we take for granted on a daily basis. Like having a conversation with our parents, that is a happy, good one. You know, learning something in philosophy class. Actually eating a good piece of good food from the cafeteria. But you might disagree. You might think happiness requires a lot more than that. And as we go through this unit, we're going to investigate some other views that say it's going to require a different orientation or guiding star as well. In any case, let's just read a few more. He continues on, "Fortune but seldom interferes with the wise person. His greatest and highest interests have been, are, and will be directed by reason throughout the course of his life. The just person enjoys the greatest peace of mind, while the unjust is full of the utmost disquietude. Pleasure in the body admits no increase when once the pain of want has been removed. After that, it only admits a variation. The limit of pleasure in the mind, however, is reached when we reflect on the things themselves and their congeners, which cause the mind the greatest alarms. Unlimited time and limited time afford an equal amount of pleasure, if we measure the limits of that pleasure by reason." So, he's obviously trying to bring up here the kind of role that our reason and our thinking and our reflection should play in our lives. He reiterated a point from one of the last sections where he says the just person enjoys the greatest peace of mind, while the unjust is full of the utmost disquietude. This is how he might respond to the serial killer thing, right? He might say, well, they think they're happy, but really on the inside they're like deceiving themselves or deluding themselves. They're not really at peace. They're not really secure. Whereas the just person actually is at peace, and they are at rest, and they are secure. But more so than that, we can use our reason and our understanding to great effect. I'm going to read just a few more and then we'll talk about these. "The body receives as unlimited the limits of pleasure, and to provide it requires unlimited time. But the mind, grasping in thought what the end and limit of the body is, and banishing the terrors of futurity, procures a complete and perfect life, and has no longer any need of unlimited time. Nevertheless, it does not shun pleasure, and even in the hour of death, when ushered out of existence by circumstances, the mind does not lack enjoyment of the best life. He who understands the limits of life knows how easy it is to procure enough to remove the pain of want and make the whole of life complete and perfect. Hence, he has no longer any need of things which are not to be won, save by labor and conflict. He's actually advocating for here what I think is a rather Buddhist view. Similarly to the idea that we investigated earlier, which was so much of how we experience our reality is informed by our mindset and our attitude, right? Whether we look at things positively or negatively, whether we are grateful or we have a scarcity mindset. Along with that idea, what he's also saying here is you can cultivate so much peace, so much pleasure and happiness by recalibrating what it is that you want. This harkens back to the empty desires thing we talked about before. If you have these desires for all of these things, if you rest your happiness on the opinions of others, or whether or not your parents are disappointed in you, or whether or not you get that job or have that new car, it's going to be really hard to make you happy, right? So like Buddhism, it seems like Epicurus here is saying, you need to rein in your desire. You need to stop wanting the things that aren't actually going to fulfill you. You need to work on that. You need to put your energy into different things. Put your attention into different things. Life is very complicated. We're going to be dealing with all these situations that require a lot of finesse, especially as technology continues to saturate the world we live in and becomes more and more a part of our lives. And we have to learn how to use all these things, right? You got to know how to navigate Point Web. You got to know how to register for your classes online. You got to know all the processes and the handbook of the school so you don't get expelled. Though you could probably follow a lot of that just with common sense. Like Aristotle, Epicurus is going to say, if you can cultivate an understanding of how this stuff works, of what moves people, of what motivates people, you're going to be able to deal with the situations of life much more easily. Right? Think about things before you jump into them. Right? Reflect. Use your reasoning and your critical thinking skills. Now, you can go overboard with that. Some of you probably have an overactive analytical mind that drives you crazy and you can't shut off and it gives you anxiety. So you can lean too far into the use of the mind. If you're like that, Epicurus would say, you got to learn how to quiet that down. I don't know, maybe see a therapist or something. I don't know. But you can use the mind properly to deal with this stuff, to get what you need to survive. Even though we are going to die, even though we don't have unlimited time, even though we're not immortal, we can still acquire a pleasurable, happy, content life. Epicurus might even say, even if you knew you were going to die tomorrow, and you only had 24 hours, he could say, yeah, you could acquire a happy life. It's going to depend on what your mindset is like, what you are oriented towards, whether you have all these empty desires or not. And you might also add, if you could only understand your situation better, what you have, what people have sacrificed so that you are able to live and do your thing, it might help you. It might help you cultivate some peace in your life. In this way, we might say he's advocating for kind of a moderate, balanced lifestyle, like Aristotle was. When we talked about the cultivation of virtue, right? In Aristotle's virtue theory, he talked about how if you want to achieve a happy and complete and flourishing life, it involves harmonizing these drives and forces within you, prioritizing them in the right way, experiencing emotion in a balanced way, right? Not going overboard. I think Epicurus might say something similar. There is such thing as too much of a good thing, like too much pleasure, right? That can hurt you. Or too much thinking. Or too much study. I might be guilty of that. Here, what time do we have? Okay, we have a few minutes here. Let's see if I can finish these up. Of all the means which are procured by wisdom to ensure happiness throughout the whole of life, by far the most important is the acquisition of friends. The same conviction which inspires confidence that nothing we have to fear is eternal or even of long duration also enables us to see that even in our limited conditions of life, nothing enhances our security so much as friendship. This is going to be a central idea in Epicurus' view. What do we need to be happy? What does he say? What do we need to be happy? Not cocaine, but friends. Right, exactly. A happy, pleasurable life requires friendship. It requires that you be in relationship with at least one person, maybe a few ideally. Humans are social creatures. We do not do well in long periods of isolation. If you don't believe me, just ask somebody who has spent time in solitary confinement. That messes with a person. It brings them low. It makes them angry and sad and resentful. It's harmful. It makes them suffer. And so Epicurus is going to say, you want to be happy? Spend more time cultivating friendships and being with your friends. That is what's going to add a lot of value and pleasure to your life. For a bunch of different reasons. What do friends do for us? How do friends add to our lives?
It creates like a bond, like if you don't have like a sibling, it creates like a emotional connection.
Yeah, you can create an emotional connection with them, and that brings you happiness, right? And if you have a strong bond like that, that means that you can rely on them, right? You have somebody in your life who's dependable, that can do things for you, that can help you out. That is a great thing to have, right? Doesn't it suck having to move all your furniture by yourself? Yeah, make some friends. They'll help you move your shit. Right? That's awesome. Moving furniture sucks, okay? And that's just one tiny example. What else can friends do? Well, they can help you learn and grow, right? A good friend is somebody who's going to want to see you grow and become a better version of yourself. And they will push you to do that. The best kind of friend is not going to enable you when you're doing the bad things. They're going to say, Jenna, this is the third time you have drunk Captain Morgan this week, and it's already Wednesday. Maybe you should cool it. Okay? Why don't you come to the gym with me? Or, is there something going on? Do you want to talk? What's happening? So friends can help us learn and grow. They can give us all different perspectives on how the world works, so they can increase our knowledge. Friends can push us to be better, morally and intellectually, right? As we've seen. Friends can provide us with psychological security. You have somebody to talk to, somebody you can vent to, somebody who will support you, who will validate your feelings. And friends can provide you with physical security. Would you be safer walking in New York at midnight by yourself or with a group of your friends? With a group of your friends, right? This is why Epicurus is going to say friendship is critical. And he goes even further than this. He says, don't just make friends. You want to be happy? You should try to form and live in a community with your friends. This is very different from how we're doing things now, right? In our neoliberal capitalist society, we are rather isolated from one another. We live in our own concrete boxes. We go to school or class in our metal boxes. We look at boxes in our free time. Do we really establish genuine relationships and connections? Hopefully, sometimes. But so much of what we are doing nowadays is, well, it's aimed towards satisfying our own pleasure, right? Hanging out on the internet, looking at the TikToks, whatever. And we don't often live with many other people. It has become the norm to, well, I'm going to move out of my parents' house. I might go to college across the country. I'm going to settle down in a city maybe that I've never really lived in before. I'll try to get a job there. Hopefully I make friends. Hopefully I find Mr. Right. And then, we'll visit the parents twice a year for holidays. That's not how we used to live. We used to live in much more close-knit, tighter communities with people that we knew and with people that we cared about. Nowadays, the majority of people don't know their neighbors. Or if they do, they don't have a strong relationship with them. So Epicurus would say, we need to flip the script on how we're doing things in our society. Maybe, he would say, what you need to do is go build a commune with your friends. Buy a house together. Pool your resources. Do you need to live in one alone? Is that feasible? Is that going to be possible for any of us? I don't know. Hopefully the market crashes. In any case, community. Community is going to be really big. And you may want to reflect on that as well. Okay, I think we're about out of time. Does anybody have any questions, comments, thoughts? It's a rather straightforward view, right? Pretty down to earth. But maybe it will add some peace and pleasure to your life. Give it a shot. Maybe this is the philosophy of life for you. I don't know. Okay. I will see you all on Tuesday. Have a good weekend.